Now we're in for another exciting part of the day, the making compliance easier. We've got a few of those themes in the first part of the day as well, but I'm sure we'll take that further during this afternoon. Now, there's no introductory opening statements this time. We're going straight into the panel session. I should point out that one of our panellists at late notice has not been able to attend. Alison Telfer, for various reasons, has not been able to come at late notice this afternoon. So that may mean more room for Q&A or more room for Q&A down the track after the showcases. So there's no end of time for good, valuable interaction between us all here. But we've still got three great people on that panel. But my first job is really just to invite Matt Simons to come up again. So Matt Simons is going to be the moderator for the next two bits, and he's probably well known to many of you. He may be known to you because of Society One, Marketplace Lender. He may be known to you because he's on the Treasurer's FinTech Advisory Group. He may be known to you because of Red Marker, of course, one of those Regtech entities that is homegrown, now recently purchased by Kaplan, but Matt can tell you more about that. But he's right in this space, and I think he'll be a tremendous moderator for these two next sessions. So over to you, Matt.
Terrific. Well, Mark, thank you for that overly generous introduction, and welcome to the second half session of this exciting day. I thought we would open up by inviting those people who are going to be on the panel, including you, Steve, to head up and get on the stage. Kathy, thank you. Michelle, I think you're around as well. Excellent. Good. Whilst we're allowing those guys to get settled, as Mark noted, I think one of the good ways to start a Regtech business is to first have the experience of what it's like trying to be a member of what you could broadly describe as the regulated base. I had a very educative couple of years engaging with ASIC around trying to get the first AFSL and ACL in Australia for a marketplace lender. The more educative experience was trying to maintain my licence obligations whilst at the same time trying to create a world of personalised digital marketing content for all of these needy borrowers who were trying to rescue from bank loans, etc. And in the journey, I discovered that compliance as a discipline didn't really scale. And that got me quite intrigued by the ability to use what I think we now generally refer to as cognitive solutions, sort of machine learning and AI type approaches to automate some parts of the compliance process. And that's the journey we've been on at Red Marker. So that's me. I'm particularly passionate about trying to encourage Regtech pilots, POCs, as they're often referred to. And I think in my capacity also as a member of the Regtech Association, with Julian and Lisa here as well, we are dead keen to see not just the words collaboration, nice, fulsome discussions, we're dead keen to see stuff actually happening. So part of the discussion we're going to have today is about how do we cut through the barrier and actually make the Regtech ecosystem in Australia deliver on the promise. We have a time-limited opportunity, I think, to build a Regtech community here that has global relevance. We need to get on with it. And so, to Mark's earlier point, there's some whiteboards at either end of the room. It would be terrific if through the course of this discussion, whether you think these ideas that the panel share with you are of such tremendous merit that they need to be noted with exclamation marks, or alternatively are such rubbish that they need to be juxtaposed with some more sensible thinking, please put your thoughts on either of these boards. It's a big part of the process ASIC are looking for is feedback in that form. So please make the effort to do that before the day's out. Okay, well, let me get on with introducing our fabulous panel. Now, we're very fortunate to have a wide spectrum of representation. We have Kathy from the regulator. Kathy is one of the commissioners. Kathy, thank you for coming along. It's great to have you, and we're hoping to get your perspective. I also know that Kathy is also a big fan of Regtech and has publicly promoted Regtech in other forums in the past. So we're looking forward to hearing Kathy's perspective. Alison unfortunately can't be here, but we also have Michelle. Now, Michelle Bain brings quite a lot of applied experience in her capacity at Suncorp as General Counsel, EGM and Head of Compliance. Did I get that right, Michelle? Right, that's quite a lot of stuff to do. It's good that you could take time out to be here today. Thank you.
Hello, okay.
Yes.
I'm no longer General Counsel. I just look after compliance, reg affairs and customer relations. Compliance is the place to be.
Oh, fantastic. Well, apologies to our legal friends in the room, but that is definitely a step up in my view as well. Now, we're also joined by Steve, and Steve is a partner at Deloitte. Steve is pretty expert and has seen the good, bad and ugly of many, many big, large digital transformations. And Steve, we're looking forward to your point of view on how Regtech can be an enabler of things other than just an easier life for the risk and compliance function and, frankly, actually help end customer experiences. And I think Steve brings a wealth of practical experience about how to do that. So let's get into it. We're on a Regtech panel. We're here after lunch. The audience may need some invigorating initial thoughts and observations panel, no pressure. Could we perhaps start by each of you giving us quick context for why it is that you're excited about Regtech? What is it about Regtech that's got you energised and allowed you to be persuaded by Mark to come onto the panel today? What is it that's exciting? Happy to take it in any order you guys would like.
Okay, I might jump in. Good, microphone's working. For me, when I look at the amount of regulation that our business has to understand, and we've got quite a lot of employees who, some of them frontline, some of them in systems, in lots of different areas. There's so many obligations that they need to navigate every day. And the thing that I really love about Regtech is it's about making all of that simple for people. If we can get that right, if we can actually help our people to understand the obligations that they need to adhere to each day, then I think that that is really going to be a win-win. It will be a win for our people because it will make their life easier. They will understand what they have to do. It'll be great that we can show the regulator that we're actually complying and how we're doing that. And it will be great for customers because it will continue to increase trust and confidence in the financial services industry. So, you know, there's win-wins all around, and obviously win-wins for the Regtech providers as well, more work, so it's good.
Yeah, that last point's not to be underestimated. Thank you.
I'll start by just saying I'm probably going to be the stirrer in the panel today. I spend my time in the intersection between what the customer wants, what the business is willing to be able to do, and what that then necessarily means to the organisations in terms of how they need to change to actually keep up. So for me, the interesting thing is just looking at the boards up there and how many people are so keen on POCs and trial and let's do and let's get on the front foot. Typically that's seen at the front end of the business trying to deal with consumer in the marketplace. So it's really heartening to see the amount of people in here who are taking that same sort of mentality to actually bring shall we call it the back side of the business forward to meet with where the front side of the business is chasing in market. So that's sort of me. As you said, I've spent a lot of time dealing with pushing the boundaries at the front and trying to get around some of these certain situations, not completely usurp them because, you know, regulatory compliance is important, but just making sure that from a customer's perspective it's as seamless as can be and it's as minimal in position, and how do we go about making that happen. So that's kind of going to be me. I'm going to be taking that challenging aspects, I suspect, today. So,
Excellent.
I'm not sure that I disagree with. Sorry. Yep, sorry. I'm not sure I disagree at all with you, Steve, on that. I think I'm a bit worried about the title Regtech because actually what I think is positive is technology assisting firms to deliver better customer outcomes, to deliver the outcomes that work for the customers, for the markets. That's what we should all be about. And to me, it's a little bit of an unfortunate situation if Regtech is treated as something that's different from the front line of what businesses should be. I think it's a really fabulous opportunity to actually say, particularly to the front office, your job is to get the customer outcomes. We'll provide you with technology that helps you do that, but you own that. That's your responsibility. That's not the second or third lines of accountability in the organisation. That's your responsibility. So I think it's really exciting. From a regulator's perspective, it's very exciting to have technology solutions do those things, because even at the most basic level, it'll be so reassuring to be able to go and find records of what has happened. You know, at the moment we struggle to even find out what's happened, why, how has it happened. And so having technology-enabled business actually will help us have a framework that we can operate in and see what's happened, why it's happened, how that problem came to manifest itself.
Excellent. You know, building on what you just said there, Kathy, I'd be interested in all three panellists' views on this, but it seems like at least some part of the Regtech, inverted commas, dialogue is a sort of policy discussion around the potential implications with some over-the-horizon long-term perspective on what this utopian, wonderful world might look like, right? And, you know, how do we get people to understand that this is relevant to today's problem? Yes, you know, you're being overwhelmed by new data requests from regulatory bodies for more information. Yes, you have existing legacy systems challenges. You've always got cost control issues. But Regtech can play an important role today, and not just sort of experimental learning. It actually can do good work today. I wonder if specifically we could get into some detail there around your thoughts on frontline staff. It seems to me we're often discussing sort of the back end of and the more senior parts of the organisation chart in terms of, you know, regulatory policy setting and risk appetite statements. People engaging with customers seem to me to be an obvious first use case for Regtech adoption inside the firm. What do you guys think of that?
I'll go first again. Okay, thanks. I think it does provide a really good opportunity to help our frontline staff in their everyday interactions. And building on Kathy's point before, Regtech is not just about helping people to comply with black letter law, it's about getting good customer outcomes. So we've been looking at some technology which is helping our frontline staff when they're having discussions with customers to use the data that we've got to recommend the next best action for those customers. So thinking with all the data that we've got about the customers, having conversations with them that we think actually are going to help meet their needs. So talking to them, not about, you know, pushing a product, but about actually saying, you know, these, based on the information that we've got about you, let's have a conversation about the things that might meet a need. I think the other thing is that we already, there's a lot of things that organisations already are doing from a Regtech space, but we may not have previously called them Regtech. So, for example, we automate a lot of controls at the front end at the moment as well, and there's a lot of ways that we use controls in the systems that we build to actually help our people comply and navigate all the things that they need to cover off.
I think probably in addition to that, there's a lot of things out there now like RPA. I'd imagine most people will be involved in some sort of processing, right? The interesting thing about that, and we're involved in a lot of that with a number of different clients, and it's really about that unlocking productivity. So you've now got a bunch of people that are no longer manually going through doing things. You can automate certain capabilities and free up intellectual capital that can then be repointed at other things which are more human decision-based, sort of policy-based considerations. The other thing, and I'm finding myself in this at the moment, we're doing a lot with chatbots, AI chatbots with cognitive machine learning decision-making. You know, when you start to look at that in the context of we're assessing you for, you know, loan suitability. We're assessing you for the purposes of insurance premiums based on what we subject your health considerations and risks to be. You know, when you start to throw all of that into the mix where it's artificially intelligent and machine-based decisioning, there's a massive policy implication on that one as well. And it's not just the fact that you've got to get the policy right to then codify the technology to make it happen, but it's ensuring the ongoing validity of all of those tools and systems are actually in place and working the way they should do when a sudden change comes. And if a sudden change comes, is it considerate in that machine learning world, or has it made other decisions? So I think there's a combination. I think the people aspect is really important. I think the policy has to be overarching regardless. But I think there's a whole new world order that's rapidly enabling itself and hitting the marketplace, which is creating a whole different world of consideration. And I think that the Regtech phrase for whatever it is, I think in some respects is probably a good thing because it sets a new norm, I think, as well, and a new expectation that we are going to face this as technology-led, or more the mindset of being agile, being smart about how we do things, being nimble, adaptive to change, trying new things. I think all of that has to come to the fore as well.
I think the whole focus should be on the customers and dealing with the customers, because let's think about the customers of the future. If you were sitting 10 years ago thinking about how people might interact with, well, maybe a bit more than 10 years ago, before the iPhone anyway, might want to interact with their banks, you wouldn't imagine a world where increasingly people just don't visit banks and do their banking all through their phone, or much of their banking through their phone. The reality is that customers' demands in the future are going to change, so it's absolutely critical that we develop technology in this industry that meets the way the customers want to transact. I think the key issue that you've raised, Matt, is also a little bit going towards what are the skills necessary to be successful in Regtech. And we all know, obviously, there's basic IT skills, basic coding skills, but I guess we shouldn't lose sight of the importance of the skills in understanding why people make transactions, why people make decisions, the whole sort of psychology of decision making and behaviours. I think that's going to be critical for Regtech to really sort of launch itself. It's going to need to understand those things, develop artificial intelligence that builds on those things and interacts with the sort of the psyche of our decision making.
Absolutely. I think the behavioural overlay, Kathy, is something that ASIC has talked about for quite a long time, and I think it's another great opportunity for the Regtech entrepreneurs in the room to be thinking about how do we weave that proposition into the development of our proposition, into the applications that we're building as an industry. So, panel, let's not diverge just yet off the front-end customer staff as the big opportunity. My own limited experience in sort of some large organisations around the world in the banking and finance industry is that one of the compliance reactions to some regulatory focus on a particular issue is often sort of a retrospective application of quite, lockdown procedures. Let's call that, say, a call centre script, right? Where previously we might have allowed a more natural, free-flowing dialogue with customers, we now react by saying, aha, what we need to do is make sure that you've covered off these things at the start of the call. And so just as a metaphor, I wonder how Regtech can perhaps more concretely attack those sorts of issues. Yes, there's the automation opportunity, but actually it seems to me there's an opportunity with these new emerging technologies of NLP, machine learning, to enable our staff, frontline facing people, to have more natural discussions. I've seen situations where the call centre staff will get an exception report because they'll start the call not with the script, but with, is that a dog I hear barking in the background, right? Just trying to be friendly. Well, straight to the, straight to the supervisor because you've immediately veered off in the first 3 seconds of the call from the standard procedure. I'm not talking about any Australian banks, of course, but just generally the challenges are there. So is this a useful way to think about it? This technology might in fact be a great liberator of people. We heard about freeing up people's time, but in fact just allowing them to talk to customers in a more natural way. Is that a possibility?
I think it's a great possibility. I think that Regtech gives the opportunity to sort of have real-time training or to have like a buddy sitting next to you when you're having that call. We've been exploring as a proof of concept at the moment some technology which actually prompts our people. They're having the natural conversation but can prompt them at different parts if there are things that they actually do need to mention. But it gives them the opportunity to weave it into the conversation in a natural way rather than it feeling, as you say, like a scripted call which doesn't actually create that really good dialogue between a customer that we're seeking. So I definitely think there's opportunities for that. And that then, with my compliance lens on, actually means that if we've got that sort of technology which is actually in real time training or helping our staff to navigate the conversation and make sure that they cover off everything that they do need to, then it actually means that the way we oversight and monitor changes as well. That, you know, I know you've all heard the expression that compliance people might change more from, you know, the policemen to the coaches. And so, you know, not only does that technology sometimes allow that guidance to be provided in real time, but it also allows monitoring as well for later on to I guess, continually think about how we can learn and evolve and to continually get better conversations with our customers, while also making sure we're ticking off all those regulatory requirements that we're often needing to capture along the way.
I think if I just build on that, I agree completely. I think the other aspect is that in today's world, we use the word cross-channel, omni-channel, whatever you want to call it. As a first-line operator, be that call centre or branch, there's enough information that can feed into you at a first touch point that you can already garner from a previous interaction that someone's had in a different channel. So the moment that they arrive, in the traditional sense of, yes, I go through the call, you know, I must ask your name, I must ask your date of birth, you know, where do you live, what shoe size, what's, you know, all these various things. You can now get a lot of that provided in either the conversation that's coming in, or if they're previously identified, you know, you're getting the call prompts and the call pops. Yep. So assuming you have all of that and you're about the actual behaviour and the understanding of the motivation of the individual and what they're trying to achieve, yep. The classic example, you know, it's like, oh, I've lost my credit card and I need to cancel it. Well, has it been stolen? Have you just lost it at home? Is it somewhere that you don't know where? You know, they're three different emotional situations that a call centre operator has to navigate. Those sorts of things are being built into these automated tools upstream now, where people can start a conversation, identify that motivation, and then it goes into an assisted conversation. So by the time it hits the assisted conversation, you're already halfway down that call flow, and to the point, if you've then got compliance support coming through and actually helping you at that point in time, you can actually get through that call quicker and more effectively as well. And I think that's where the combination of these things starting to come together becomes really interesting and really powerful. It also touches on entire operating models, and I'm sure there'll be a question to come later, so I'm going to pause at that point.
So I think this is a really interesting question, because in some ways you can have a stilted, scripted conversation no matter what sort of world you're operating in, can't you? And really, it's really up to the Regtech entrepreneurs to think what are the good products here, and what are products that are just going to create the same sort of problems that Matt spoke about with a very inflexible script. But of course, the real challenge is going to be how do you blend all the available technologies, and what decisions is your firm going to make about how they use them. So, for example, because you happen to have data on a whole lot of spending activities by the person who's rung up, are you going to use that as an opportunity to push particular products to them that's much more efficient because it's technology enabled and you've got all the relevant statistics in front of you? Or are you going to use that for the purposes of having a more fruitful conversation about the thing the customer's interested in? I mean, those sorts of decisions are decisions that you need to make, irrespective of the type of technology that's available. And we as regulators are going to be interested in the decisions you make there, just as much as anything else. I guess sort of running on from that too is a question about, as we are in an increasingly globalised financial services world, how are you going to design your Regtech? Are you going to design it just to meet the customer's requirements about the Australian landscape, or are you going to design it to meet the customer's interests in the range of investment options they might have available to them? And I think that's probably a pretty key decision for a number of Regtech entrepreneurs.
Okay, that's super helpful, because you've preempted sort of the next question, which is we do have some Regtech entrepreneurs in the room. In fact, if you're a Regtech entrepreneur, why don't you put up your hand just so Kathy can see that's not made up? Look at the numbers, isn't that fantastic? First of all, a little round of applause to anyone insane enough to start a Regtech business. I think ASIC's put on some group counselling later on in the corridor if you're interested. But we've heard about a lot of potential. Now, what do you think is sort of stopping Regtech really delivering on its potential? What's what's kind of holding it back? We heard a session, you weren't here for this morning session, Kathy, unfortunately, but we did hear a session on some of the entrepreneurs talking about some of the challenges that they believe exist. But just from your perspective, panel, what are some of the things that kind of are obvious blockers?
So I think the label might be a problem.
Right, you've said that. Okay,
if you're wanting to sell, my experience in financial services firms is there's less of the wallet is available for risk management systems and compliance than one would necessarily like. But if you're selling a good front office system, there's a lot more interest in spending the money. So I think we can still have a wonderful Regtech community, but the way you sell your product might be quite a key thing. Really focus on what the benefits are going to be for the customer, and the savings and the profitability opportunities from a better business opportunity.
Excellent. Well, Steve, you built a career accessing exactly those budgets Kathy's talking about.
Yeah, let's not move them too far too quickly, huh?
I need to wear a tie anymore. That suggests to me things are going well. What can you tell us about that? I mean, is that hypothesis that Kathy's put forward true? And if so, what do the Regtechs need to do to get into that corridor?
Yeah, look, I'm probably more sitting on the Regtech side, the entrepreneurs in the room. There's probably three things for me that I'd say are the barriers. The first one is the constantly changing environment. There's that many new regulations and, compliance requirements that the constant updating is always a challenge, particularly for someone who's building some sort of tech or solution, right? It's that constant update and maintenance ability. And then obviously having to sell that into an organisation in some sort of managed service. The second one, I think, is actually in a marketplace where you're coming up with something new and innovative. It's very similar to the fintech in that there's a plethora of options out there. Which one do you choose? The competitive aspects of do I do it, do I not? It's still kind of new. We need to change. We need to do all these things. I think there's an element of confidence of, am I making the right decision by investing with a Regtech provider in coming in? But I think the third, and probably this is the toughest challenge, is, and this is what I face into day to day, there's a great idea of spending to the consumer and fixing the consumer, but there's the front of house, and then there's the people that deliver all of the compliance reporting and all the back of house compliance checking, etc. Typically, those two don't sit on the same project council. And trying to get a business stakeholder at the front who's trying to optimise money in, cost out, productivity gain, whatever it may be with a customer, and having someone at the back going, yeah, but you've still got to report on these things. They're like, yeah, that's great, but that's not my priority. And so I think the organisation of who you're talking to and how you position and sell the Regtech offering in has to be really mindful of, if you're doing this, it may not sound as sexy as what you may think, but further down the actual trail when you're getting to reconcile at the end of this process, you're going to get a lot of support from internal by actually this helping do X, Y, Z, right? So it's really, there's got to be a value chain right the way through the organisation of benefit. And if you can get that, then it's a lot easier for the business stakeholder to then get buy-in and compliance support, which then helps extend the budgets a little bit further. And if you can actually do that, you create a better solution end to end anyway, because you're reducing that friction in between the organisation. It's not an easy task though. And I think that's probably the biggest challenge point, is getting that alignment across the industry from the various different product and business unit areas.
Yeah. And I guess the consulting firms could play a role there in terms of bringing your own risk and compliance teams into those design sessions, that kind of compliance by design idea we heard about this morning. I guess that's also part of it, right? On those project teams, kind of lead by doing and actually show that you can bake that into the front end of the process. Is that sort of starting to happen? Or?
Yeah, definitely. We're working more and more with our risk team from our digital practice, of course, but our risk team is definitely alongside us a lot more and a lot closer than what it has been in the past. Yep. But I even think just making people aware of it and thinking about it, because typically front of house and consumer facing don't necessarily think about the end obligation. They just think about what we need to do. Oh, we've got to fix this, we've got to do this, we've got to put this tech in, we've got to make this happen. And you're so focused on the experience of what that process looks like that you don't necessarily think through the full end to end. And ultimately that can be where some of the biggest savings can come from in the long run.
It's not easy though, putting myself in the shoes of the risk and compliance team. They get invited to these cool meetings, the Agile Scrum meeting, right? And there's all these tickets on the wall and people are pulling tickets off the wall, right? and someone at the end goes, okay, that's what we're going to do, let's get that page up in half an hour. And someone looks at risk and compliance, goes, are we good with that? And risk and compliance says something fairly reasonable, I would have thought, like, could I at least see a wireframe? Oh, you don't get it, this is the point, we're trying to be agile. You know, so it's easy to say we're going to get the teams together, but actually finding the right amount of, walking in each other's shoes kind of shared understanding is not trivial, right? Maybe from an operating perspective, how's it going trying to build those kind of agile teams and get the kind of agile outcomes you're looking for?
Oh, look, we all act agile in our organisations. No, look, I think, risk for us, we've got risk people involved, but we really do try in, our culture for risk to be owned by everyone. So, we're there to oversight, but for everybody in the same way that in the way they're building products, they're thinking about how does this respond to a customer need? How am I meeting, the target market, etc. We're also saying to our people, you've got to build risk into that as well. You've got to be thinking like you own the business around what are the risks with this and trying to cover it off. So hopefully we're trying to do ourselves out of a job effectively, but as second line compliance. But I just did want to touch on 2 points that were made before. The first one that Kathy talked about, I agree that compliance isn't sexy. And so if you go to your business and say, I'd like a portion of the investment budget to spend on a compliance, Regtech piece, chances are you're not going to get it as quickly as if you go and say, I've actually got this, all of these customer pain points I want to solve, and I think Regtech can help us get there. It's a very different conversation. And I think sometimes often it's not just, we're not just when we're talking about Regtech talking about obligations, we're talking about improving the customer experience as part of that, building in obligations. So it's a whole lot of different pieces that we're actually weaving into that rather than it just being a compliance exercise. Another thing for me, I think that's a barrier for companies is a lot of Regtech companies have one small part of the solution, and for big companies, they're trying to figure out how does that fit, and if it's just one small aspect, how's that going to integrate with our systems? Is it actually worth it if you're just giving me with this one little part? So I think there's a really good dialogue around, working together to realise the benefits, but how that plays into the broader systems of the organisation.
So just picking up on those points, Michelle, I think that's really important. One of the things I think I sometimes hear the Regtech conversation being a little bit about taking compliance cost out of a business. And I guess from a regulator perspective, that is very concerning. I can understand that Regtech might help slow down a growth in compliance costs, but it is really not about taking out compliance costs, particularly in financial services businesses, where I think we would say track record has that there hasn't been, especially in this country, the sort of investment in broad compliance style activities that we'd like to see. So it's not about taking the costs out. Perhaps it will slow down perhaps the growth in some of those costs because of automation. So I think that is probably a sort of a key element. Yeah.
Well, there's a couple of subjects we want to cover before we open it up to the panel. So to the audience, I beg your pardon. So please get your questions and comments ready. But just a very quick observation from each of you on some of the implications of what we've just described for the operating model. So the 2.0 view of risk and compliance and sort of the related functions. I mean, Sean, maybe we can start with you because you very sensibly got rid of that GC responsibility. So you're already reshaping how it works, which is terrific. Very quickly, from each of you, what do you think this means for the 2.0 version of the function as we've historically understood it?
At Suncorp, we've been doing quite a bit of thinking about what the future of risk looks like, and we've boiled it down to 5 things for us. We've got simplicity over complexity, that it's data-driven, that it's future-focused, that risk is business-owned, and that we have a one Suncorp approach. So within Suncorp, we've got a bank, a general insurer, a life insurer, we've got the platforms, we've got the wealth business, but we are one Suncorp. And so those 5 principles are really leading the way that we manage risk at Suncorp, and I think those 5 principles very much talk to Regtech as well. when I look at what we're trying to achieve with Regtech and, you know, some of the things I saw this morning, all of them talk to these principles, and I think, you know, how we can effectively manage risk going into this next fourth industrial revolution, I think it was called this morning.
I think the world that we know it is not going to be the world of what it will be in a short space of time. If it was me and I was putting a bet down, which luckily I'm not, but I would suggest the open economy is going to make a big change on risk. With the amount of data sharing, third-party data that you're actually using, you're making assessments around your own data with other third parties' data, using that to contribute to a quicker outcome and a decision. There's no difference then to say, well, why wouldn't the risk function from, say, a regulator start to become the one that we call upon to make that external decision for us, that we then overlay whether we're comfortable with that or not and pass it back. There will always be internal risk and compliance, but I think there's the thing I'm really interested in, and I sort of threw it out the other day as we were quickly discussing this, was what is the role of the regulators and the bodies out there to actually control something at an industry level that everyone can then just go, well, that's a lot easier for us to actually commit to because it's already dealt with, it's consistent, everybody knows what it is, and then you can apply whatever other risk weightings you have on top of that. I think that's probably the biggest challenge at the moment, is that everyone goes ahead and makes their decisions, rightly or wrongly, in their own mind, and then it's, well, we now have to get that. Is it verified? Is it validated? Is it correct? Are we okay with this? As opposed to flipping it around and saying, well, the regulators and these bodies have actually taken that forward step, much like all the POCs we see up there, and saying, we're actually going to take the leading position, you just need to comply with what that is, and then it takes a lot of the ambiguity out of it. I think that's going to be an interesting change to how the market perceives the function of sort of risk and compliance ongoing.
Okay, so nice segue. I guess, so from our perspective, we think about how we operate and how we interact with the people we regulate, and there's a couple of principles that we certainly have adopted. One is generally we'd like to receive information from the people we regulate in a digital format if we can. Now, what we need to do to help that is publish some guidance, some standards about what sort of formats might make sense, and that's something that's on our drawing board to do. And other regulators internationally have done that. We're interested in basic principles. If we collect data from you, we're going to store it in a searchable format. We're not going to make... our goal is not to request the same data from you, 5 minutes later from another part of our organisation. That's not our goal, so we'd like to reduce the number of data requests. We've been able to do that with... Yeah, we've been able to do that with our market surveillance system, which we implemented about 3 or 4 years ago. We've reduced our requests, I think it's about a third, is that? 2/3. So we have a bit of a successful track record there. Where the issues get a little bit more interesting is, there is a plethora of regulators who hit your various industries, not just domestic regulators, but international regulators as well. And probably the most useful thing we can do as a regulatory community is get better at sharing information amongst ourselves. That requires a degree of generosity from you as well, so that you're saying, no, it's okay, give the ACCC that material you collected, or give the SEC that material. Those sorts of things I think will actually help everyone's life, certainly in the future. We at ASIC are just starting to collect the costs of regulating, well, the government is just starting to collect the costs of regulating the financial services sector through an industry funding model. And part of that model the model is predicated on the notion that those who cause the need for regulation should pay for the regulation. And you can see, if you take that philosophy, that there's plenty of opportunities for people in the regulated community to say, you know what, for our FX trading system, we're going to use this particular monitoring tool, we're going to use this particular platform, and we're going to do things this way. How do you feel about that, ASIC? Does that help you get more comfortable about the degree of amount of time you're going to spend on our business? And I think we're not interested at all in picking winners on providers of technology, but we would be interested if there are systems that various organisations are using, in knowing about that and incorporating an assessment of that system, that tool, into our surveillance in the future, so that we can perhaps be a little bit more efficient in how we do things. And I guess the other key point is that we want to be sure that the Regtech developments and more broadly fintech developments ensure that we do everything we can to enhance competition, not to create a different set of barriers to entry. So that will be something that will play on our mind.
Terrific. Well, we are almost ready for some audience questions, but I thought, Michelle, if I could borrow your microphone just to demonstrate that we are going to be quite interactive in this next session. Kathy, are you ready? Because there's already a couple of suggestions over here which I thought I'd read out, and I'd like you just to give us the one-word feasible sort of Fantasyland type summary. Maybe we can keep it as short and sharp as thumbs up, thumbs down. Sorry to put you on notice, but this is an opportunity to get a sense for what might be possible under the heading of what role should ASIC take in promoting the use of Regtech. Now, there's a couple of audience ideas here. I'll just go through them. Ask the regulated base to report on the number of Regtech POCs they're running as a proxy for culture of compliance. Interesting.
That might be nice to do. I'm not sure whether that changes life very much. Yeah.
Fine. Publish results from regulators' use of Regtech themselves, particularly ASIC, would help promote transparency.
Oh, well, I think that's fine. We'd be happy to do that. That's a good idea.
I think ASIC Security has pushed the curtains down now that we're having this off-the-range discussion. Sorry, Kathy. So how can we imagine breaking down the barriers to enable a Regtech Sandbox 2.0? Could it be possible to encourage the regulated base to embrace some of these new technologies, let them into the sandbox, ? Get rid of the sandbox idea and make it possible for anyone to run Regtech pilots and encourage them to do so. I mean, I think this is directionally what you were saying earlier.
So, I mean, the sandbox is all about providing an exemption from the licensing requirement. I'm not quite sure whether you need a sandbox for the provision of a risk management tool, which I think sounds like most of the Regtech ideas are. So I'm not sure that that's a necessary. It's a little bit like the first one. Great, nice idea, but I'm just not sure what problem it's solving.
Right.
Yeah.
I think it might be referring to ASIC themselves using these Regtech tools and then talking about that.
Oh, I see. Okay. I think that ASIC would be happy to do some of those things, but just remember, have anyone has ever tried to bring a technology product into government? It may not be the fastest way to get to market. You know, it is. Yeah, there is a different structure for doing those things in government. So
maybe you could run that in parallel with a soup kitchen for impoverished entrepreneurs. Okay, good. Thank you, Kathy. That was a very good sport of you there. Let's take some questions from the audience now and really try and drill a little bit deeper on some of the themes we've discussed. So, got some mics. Okay, who would like to be first up? Thank you. The back. Okay, great.
Marianne Robinson from Spark Helmont. Look, as an old-timer who's been around compliance and risk for about 40 years, a lot of the issues that you've talked about this afternoon are the same issues we've been talking about for 40 years. And it seems to me that one of the things that we need to think about perhaps is that we got it wrong when we actually insisted on people in the financial services sector having to have compliance managers. Because it seems to me, I've been through it from distribution, in-house, development, marketing. I've been through all of it. And it seems to me that what's happened over the last 40 years is that more and more the compliance role has been shunted off to the compliance manager, and the business units have increasingly become totally detached from it. And because of that, they don't feel accountable for it, they don't own it, they're not responsible for it, it doesn't come off their bottom line, which is why everyone in compliance fights the budget issues that they've been fighting for 40 years. So maybe we need to have something really out there, and that is we abolish the compliance managers, we abolish the compliance groups, we have consulting experts on compliance, but we make the business units own it once and for all.
Marianne, I think that was the point I was trying to say before. As we try and uplift the capability in the first line, which I think is a big part of the role of second line compliance teams, and it's definitely something that my team works very closely with the business on, for them to continually uplift the understanding and maturity of what their compliance obligations are and how they're managing them. But as we see that uplift, it should actually, as I was saying before, do us out of a job if we do that well, so that people are managing and understanding their own risk. And I think that's the case. But I think the opportunity here is that Regtech is relatively new, like some of the things we heard about today. I think are really going to shift quite quickly. You're talking about 40 years. I think the next 5 years, if we get this right, it'll be very, very different. And I think the role of second line compliance people will be very different. I know I've had discussions with my team around what we think our skill set is going to need to be in 5 years. And it's not what they're doing now. It's not, there is going to be some monitoring and oversight, but a lot of it is going to be around continuing to build capability in that first line. And also, potentially looking at how we are oversighting the algorithms and oversighting the risks that are posed by Regtech as well, and the reliance on that. So, it's really shifting, I think, the skill sets that's there at the moment. But yeah, it'd be interesting to see if we have the same conversation in 5 years.
If I can just jump in there as well, the projects that I see working really well are ones where, and I actually insist on it from my clients, I want compliance in the room from the start. They're part of the Scrum team. So they are there as you're coming up with the ideation, as you're working through the solution, before you even go to build and you're getting your market testing. Because if you've got that compliance lens in there, you're right, the business are never going to become compliance people because they're not classically trained in that way. And if you try to make them cross-skilled in that way, you're going to get so far, but it's just not necessarily their thing, right? So you need representation in there, whoever wears that hat. But when you've got it in there, you've got to have it in there right at the start. I had a working session for 4 hours with a whole group from one client not too long ago, and the whole onboarding experience of their customers was predicated on this belief that, we can't do that. And for the very first time, because I'd brought them in, we had a compliance and risk person at the end, and they said, but why not? Of course you can do that. And suddenly there was a group of 12 people in the room going, actually, we can. And we changed an onboarding experience from something that took weeks, if not months, into things that took minutes, if not, an hour. Now that's a massive change, all because of perception, because the people in the room didn't actually understand what it was because they hadn't taken the time. So there is absolutely a role for it. The key is, how do you get it right up front when that initial brainstorming and that initial workshop and planning happens? Because that's where it's most important. You don't want to leave it till the end because that's just costly, but getting it up front.
I was just going to say, I actually think the people whose jobs are going to change the most are the front office. Absolutely regulators will be looking for, compliance jobs will change. Of course, there'll be more automation and those sorts of things, but the judgment that goes into deciding what are the monitoring programs, what are the judgment calls, what are the policies that you need, how's the training going to be set up, they're absolutely going to be there. Those calls are going to be there and be needed to be made by compliance professionals. But I think if you look at what we've seen in the wholesale markets over the last 10 years or so, those markets have gone to being largely algorithmically traded, and the skills of the people who are in the front office of those markets have changed dramatically. And I think that's the area where there'll be quite a significant change, and quite a significant change in capability. Opportunities would be different, and that's sort of fine. That's how business works, isn't it? There are new technologies, new horizons, new opportunities. So I think that is what's going to happen. And I'm a bit more optimistic that as part of that happening, the need to comply with the regulatory requirements will be built into the system.
Absolutely. You know, it's interesting that one senior risk and compliance person in the room is actually already turning themselves into a chatbot. Mark, do you want to talk a little bit about what you're actually doing? I mean, that is embracing change at a very personal level. Mark is actually trying to create himself as a chatbot. It's a fascinating experiment. How's that going?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. So good. Yeah, so look, part of, and it sort of goes to what we're kind of talking about here, which is how do you, I think when we talk about the roles for compliance, part of the challenge is that people who work in compliance have been placed in roles where they're expected to be the ones who know all the answers and make sure everything goes wrong, and also stop the not be business blockers, and all of these different things that makes our roles really complex. And I think the biggest challenge going forward is actually to really shift this focus from actually that, you know, how do we make sure that certain things happen, to how do we ensure that the right outcomes are being achieved. And so, you know, part of what we've been experimenting with my team at ANZ is just trying to come up with some different ways about how we might think about our roles. And one of those was developing a chatbot, which kind of replaces the day-to-day questions that annoy my team. So, you know, can I do this under the policy? Am I allowed to accept this gift? Can I trade shares at this time? And having, you know, a chatbot scripted to basically answer those questions. And sort of that's kind of interesting. But the more interesting thing is actually open the opportunities to people, both, you know, in the team, about what's possible when you start playing with some different technology and so forth. And I think, you know, when we talk about what are the barriers to kind of, you know, companies adopting Regtech type solutions, it's all well and good to have a solution that everybody look at and say it's great, but you actually need innovation capability within the actual organisations to accept those, because just plugging in a solution isn't actually the issue. It's being able to kind of rethink your process and rethink how you actually achieve those outcomes, which is going to be really important.
Yep. Excellent. Very well made points. Yes, one at the back and then one down the front.
Yeah, g'day. Michelle, a question for you. My name's Paul Carey. I'm from TIC. We're hopefully one of your customers in the future, or you're going to be one of our customers in the future. I was interested in your comment where you said that you've got to balance that thing where we will be a small part of your process and how that fits in. I guess in our world, and probably the same for a number of other people in the room, your small part is our big part. You know, that's our world. So I'm interested to understand what's important to you, taking our view of the world. Is it making sure that we get our scope right? Is it about finding somebody to collaborate with or to pilot with? What's going to open the door for us to be able to work with people like yourself? And this is picking up from the conversation this morning where a lot of the early starter businesses were talking about that difficulty in finding the right people in businesses to talk to and to get them engaged quickly enough to make decisions. You know, we're trying to find funding and to build businesses. So how do we achieve that from your perspective?
Okay, I think the starting point for our strategy is a customer-centric strategy where our vision is to create a better today for our customers. And so anything, I think, where Regtech companies can show that the solutions that they're offering are ultimately helping us deliver on that strategy is a really good starting point. Because I think, as I was saying before, that's sort of the pitch that we need to then go and get, you know, a slice of that investment budget. I think then, you know, to give some colour in terms of, you know, what it is that's actually going to, you know, what you need from us to be able to do that proof of concept or that initial piece. But in terms of who to speak to in organisations, I think for things like Regtech, maybe it starts with the compliance teams, but then often it might become a conversation with other stakeholders who can hear the benefits that you could bring to the organisation. Because I know from a compliance perspective, we work very, very closely with our customer experience teams in the way that we are oversighting to ensure that our frontline staff are providing value to customers and looking at things like culture and conduct risk and how they impact impact on customer outcomes. And so similarly, Regtech, I think if you look at it not just from the obligations but more broadly how it actually aligns with the company's strategy, then I think, getting that initial in with whether it's the compliance team or whoever, but then actually having an audience more broadly to be able to explain where you can add that value, I think is a good start.
What about in regards to... How do you typically work with these sorts of businesses? Is it in a collaboration sense, or would you rather see a fully working, functional product before you start talking to people?
I think a bit of a demonstration to get a bit of an idea, but I think sometimes it is a collaborative thing, and that as you work together, there's pain points that companies can share that they've found, and equally that that you can bring to solving as well. So I think collaboration is good, but companies initially need to at least understand the concept or the the value proposition that you've got, but then building iteratively after that I think is really important together.
Right. Question down the front here, John.
So we sort of discussed some of the issues at the periphery, but I wanted to ask directly each of the members of the panel, what do you think needs to be done in terms of accountability and governance, both for private enterprise and for regulators, to make sure that you don't end up with Regtech algorithms that go exceedingly badly for everyone involved?
So this is an interesting issue, and interesting one for us, which we have discussed amongst ourselves at various times. At one level, an algorithm, whether it's an algorithm for trading or giving advice, or assessing and monitoring your own systems, is just another version of your risk management process. And you just need to have a good risk management process, and you need to make sure that things are working properly, and the people who have those responsibilities in your organisation need to satisfy themselves they're doing that. But at the next level, the question is, can't the problems really be multiplied if you're using an algorithm? If you're relying on a Regtech algorithm to give advice, and you have hundreds and thousands of customers, and they could all be getting abysmal advice that affects how they invest their life savings, is it enough to allow risk management systems? Or should the regulators actually be ticking off the algorithms before they're provided? I mean, so far we've said we're looking at the risk management system. We're not getting that detailed in relation to robo-advice, for example, whereas in the markets area we actually do check algorithms that are being used. So we haven't got a really firm view on this. I suspect it's one of those evolving areas, but be interested in others' views.
I think it's going to become really interesting in the next few years. I think what's going to happen is everyone's going to embrace the notion around automation and cognitive and the ability to do things at scale and do it and transform the operating model and the people model around how they support it. But much the same way as anything that's come through digital technologies, right? The first time it goes wrong, it hits the front page and everybody panics, a knee-jerk reaction. My question is really, particularly clients, right? How much information is enough to be making that recommendation? And is it a recommendation, or is it just something that we're putting up on screen and suggesting, but it's not necessarily specifically for you? Insert as many disclaimers as you possibly can as a get-out clause. That's where we're at today, right? Particularly wealth management, when you're talking about investment mixes, making sure that, have I got the full disclosure of who you are? How much information is enough before I can give you a pre-approval amount for a lending product? Within what bounds and tolerances? So what I'm seeing is that organisations are taking a step. They're moving in safe increments. They're not going to the fullest extent of where they could completely open up the book in terms of how far they can approve people. The next one that I think is going to move really quickly, so, credit cards, credit cards, personal loans, an element of super in terms of where your investment mixes are. Those are the things that are currently dabbling. The home loan space will be the next one. There's as much due diligence done to give you pre-approval without telling you it's pre-approval in the modelling tools. And all of those are starting to automate, and they're starting to now look at other determinants. There's organisations out there assessing a business's fit for a business loan overdraft based on how many jobs they've got in SIC, because that's a sign of the business's growth. And so there's all these different things that are now starting to happen with fintech and all those abilities to make assessments and judgments. Do they comply to the traditional old-fashioned way of adjudicating risk? No. Enough of them together? Probably. Where is that grey line? And I think the grey line will only ever become black and white when the moment comes where something goes wrong. I think to the point earlier around the where do you go as a Regtech organisation, is that you've got a great idea, you've got a great model, you've got a great piece of the puzzle, so to speak. It's understanding how does that then orchestrate itself out into the broader business and into the, as I said, the end-to-end value chain, and understanding that positioning will help give you a greater opportunity to get success, but it will also then give greater comfort around where it's going to go. But I think it's going to get worse before it gets better. That's my gut feel.
But what a great opportunity. I mean, I think algoaudit.com.au seems to be available, and I mean, I would have thought with the Regtech entrepreneurs in the room, we would be thinking, well, hang on, this problem is an opportunity, right? John and Kathy are discussing it, they haven't cracked it, sounds like we ought to whip something up. I mean, to the extent that we have human-based verification today with auditors, we have control procedures that purport to allow humans to be very thorough and diligent in analysing these things, why can't we just have a auditor of the algorithms? Right? Interesting question. Right, let's have another question from the audience. At the back.
One to Kathy, maybe even John from the prior session. Interested to hear the point around looking at algorithms and looking at the market space. Question for you as we sort of look forward. What's ASIC doing around capability in your sphere to actually have the capability to be able to play as the supervisor in this space?
Great question. We are working to develop our capability. We've assessed our workforce, and our various teams have sort of assessed ourselves and thought, what are the skills we need for the next 5 to 10 years? Do we have them? Where are our gaps? That sort of thing. And absolutely, we've identified, particularly in our markets area, that we'd like to build our data analytics skills. We'd like to build our behavioural economics skills. We think we need to build those as well. And we need to build our skills in the global market sort of sphere. They're sort of the key areas that we've identified. And we're starting to change our hiring so that we're hiring more people with that sort of skill set, but we're also working hard to build our own confidence in our own and our own capabilities to get that skill set. It'll obviously take time, and we're working with other organisations, so very generously organisations. So, for example, Data 61, we have a secondee working at Data 61, and at the moment we're doing those sorts of things to try and expand our skill set.
Mark, I think you have a question in the front.
We sort of talked a little bit around the outcomes piece, and I think if you think about most legislation and regulation we have is there to achieve some sort of outcome, but it's very hard to kind of legislate an outcome. So often what gets legislated is things to do in the hope that it achieves that outcome, and so disclosure and a whole bunch of other stuff. And it seems to me that with the idea about Regtech, you could almost go in two directions, right? And one could be actually to say, in the face of some major problem, is just to introduce a whole bunch of additional things to do, which will actually be easier to do because the technology will allow us to do things. Or actually you step away from that and say, actually, how do we use the technology piece and the way that we regulate really to focus on what those good outcomes are and allow innovation and change in the way that you do things. And so I guess a question for everybody, but Kathy, probably also for you, about how ASIC thinks about, its regulatory approach and guidance, and obviously it doesn't control the legislation, but it controls how to interpret and think about regulating it in that context.
I was smiling because we were talking about this exact issue just before we came on. And it gets more complex when you think about the plethora of regulators nationally and globally. So you could go to a sort of a nirvana world where you had Parliament passing rules that sort of said what code should say. But I'm not sure that would be particularly useful, given that we're working in a global world, we're an importer of capital. It's absolutely key that we're able to operate efficiently. So that says to me that a lot of Regtech businesses does need to be outcomes focused and then have the capability to solve particular problems by having modules that deal with some very prescriptive issues. But it also does say to me that there's a big artificial intelligence opportunity, isn't there? If you can suddenly think about, how would the world's regulators react to something like the Wells Fargo scandal, and what would be the sort of surveillance and monitoring they'd be expecting to prevent that happening? Then if you've got that built into your Regtech systems, perhaps that's the most essential way. So your artificial intelligence is changing the systems as you go, depending on the outcomes. Because I guess if somebody wanted to do the analysis, probably the regulatory world, or particularly government's responses to regulatory crises, have been reasonably predictable. We probably have followed each bad thing that's happened with either a regulatory reaction or a government reaction. So it'd be quite interesting. I don't know what others think.
Sorry, I was just listening with interest, but I think for me in this area, I think the challenge is that we do want to use, we want Regtech to be able to help, I guess, navigate good customer outcomes. So it's about technology augmenting decision making. I think you're always going to have the human element in there, but actually having the technology sitting behind, sort of helping people navigate the conversations to get the right customer outcomes. I think your question was also going to the piece of let the innovation do its work for itself, and I think I think we are all on the same page in wanting to get a good outcome for the industry, to build trust, to build confidence, to actually do things by the book and get good customer outcomes. I think that's pretty much what everyone wants, and Regtech can help us get there. So, if we can show as an industry working with Regtech that that's the way to go, then, maybe we will see regulation change.
I think as we wait for our next question, if you just build on that, if you look at the actual drafting process by which legislation actually comes to pass, and I won't speak now about the political process, just rather the N equals a reasonably and alarmingly small number of people actually churn out the legislation themselves, these poor, underpaid, overworked Canberra drafting experts. They have very little time per line of code produced to actually think about whether what they've constructed reasonably represents the underlying intent of the policy notes and guidance that's provided sometimes at the start of the briefing process and sometimes not, depending on what hour they're working at, right? If we as an industry want better outcomes, we have to imagine supporting that process with clearer, more consensus-based, guidance in the first instance, and maybe putting some more resources into that. Because candidly, those surprisingly young people just, it's a line a minute or you're out, right? So we get what we deserve in some sense.
I also wonder if there's an opportunity for simulation Regtech approaches which can look at how potential reg change might impact,
Yes.
and looking at not only the things that we might think about, but when you do a simulation, seeing the whole system and how it impacts. And I think that's something as much for regulators when they're thinking about regulation to think how's it going to impact more broadly, because sometimes the best thought out regulation may have unintended consequences. And similarly, when you're as an organisation trying to implement that Regtech change, also thinking through the broader implications. There have been times when we've been rolling out new changes where you actually don't think about, until you really start to get into the detail and try and implement it all, that you actually realise that it can impact a lot more areas of your business than what your initial analysis may have been. So I think that piece around simulation technology would be really powerful, both for regulators and for business.
I think there's an interesting play as well with, as these things start to become more automated and RPA and all these things. I mean, I take some of the work I'm doing at the moment with one client around a chatbot. We're creating another content base that the chatbot will self-learn and will continue to operate serving customers around. Now, the big question that I'm starting to say to them is you're running these things as POCs and pilots, as we've got up on the board, but the biggest challenge you've then got is you've got your core systems that are delivering to market, where they've got things like, say, interest rates. There's a central source of interest rates, but that is not feeding up into the content that's currently going up into the chatbot because it's a POC, and the integration cost of that, you want to trial it first, right? So the moment an interest rate change happens, as a classic example, you're now out of sync with your data source. And I think I love the idea of, the regulator taking the forward step and the forward approach and the philosophy and changing the viewpoint and the stance. Technology will be technology. You can connect anything, you can do whatever you want. Tech will happen. Right? That's not the problem. The problem is really then having that interpretation of what does that mean in a simulation and say, right, well, now my business process has now got to change, or my integration of my technology through the stack has now got to be enabled in a much more seamless way, so that it's a one change here which cascades everywhere. Those are going to be the trip-ups that are going to happen throughout the process of implementing these things. And particularly when you start as a POC and a POC grows legs and a POC suddenly becomes pilot, becomes actually production, and it's technical debt, but yeah, we'll get to that later, which never happens, right? And then there's an extra step involved in the process to make sure whenever we change something back. I think the notion around, and this is where the interpretation for me and with the regulating bodies taking the forward step of saying this is what we mean and this is how. The challenge is the breadth of use case and the breadth of interpretation of that. I'm not necessarily sure you're going to get to a solvable problem there or an answer.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because I would have actually thought that finding the one COBOL programmer still alive to update my legacy systems interest rate versions was probably a bigger challenge than getting your bot to sync with whatever the governing committee decision was. But nonetheless, it's a good point. Any other questions before we break? Yes.
Hi, it's Evan from Checkbox here. Michelle, you mentioned there would always be a human element to it. So I was wondering, I think that's a very important sentiment, because there's a lot of, perception around what can be automated in terms of regulation and our jobs and things like that. So what do you think fundamentally in the regulation space and the work within the compliance cannot be automated by computers in the near, say, 20, 30 years?
Well, look, it actually is a good question, and maybe I should eat my words. Some things definitely probably can be, like, chatbots, and I was reading millennials are very, very keen to take up, chatbots and to use them and interact with them, and we see, WeChat in China and how that's actually gone across generations, so clearly there's a real opportunity there. I guess I was thinking more in the compliance space when we're oversighting, looking at the data that we're getting and the insights that are coming. There's always got to be that human element there. And similarly there's always, I think, there's going to be a certain customer base that is going to want to talk to somebody, whether it's after a digital interaction and then going to talk to someone about something that can't be solved in that way. So I guess in the shorter term, and maybe longer term, it is the chatbots, but in the shorter term, I think there's a real opportunity while we have call centres and staff sitting in there having those human interactions. I think it's when you've got that technology sitting there helping the staff to navigate the conversation in a compliant way, but also in a way that is actually going to get good customer outcomes. is a real opportunity in the next 5 years.
Hi. Ruth from Moneycatcher again. We've heard so many examples of the fact that there is a vast array, and the word plethora of opportunity has been thrown around, and things like that, of Regtech solutions available in Australia. So that's one really important point that I think we've got consensus on in the room. The second is that both the regulators and the financial institutions are saying that they want to engage in some of these solutions. But to me, there seems to be almost a risk of inaction that's forming here, where we all want to engage and we like the opportunity, but just not sure what the next steps are. So my question is there room, understanding the objectiveness of nature of the regulators, to create at least a sandbox with a few key elements or objectives of big pain points or things that they would like to solve with Regtech solutions today? So not guiding who the providers are or which financial institutions should engage, but let's solve the big rocks first, and then not be afraid about the fact that we could apply AI or all the other cool bits later on. Let's solve the big bits first, and would there be an appetite from the regulator to at least guide that conversation and engage that, so that we got some action as opposed to just conversations?
Look, I think ASIC's very happy to be as facilitative as possible, but are you asking what are our problems, or what are the problems the industry is seeing and they'll pay you to develop a solution to solve? Because if you're asking about our problems, they really go to our systems and our way of doing things, and there's obviously... we'd obviously be very interested in having conversations with people who are interested in helping us solve our problems. But I don't think we need a sandbox to do that. So I think you're probably wanting a sandbox more to experiment on, to provide an environment where you can feel like you're safely solving some industry problems and practicing and testing whether things work. Is that?
It's not, I guess the safety element's not for the Regtech, the safety element's for the financial institution. So call it, label it, whatever it is. Right. Is there an experimental ground that could be created and guided by the regulator for two purposes? One is around solutions for you guys, but one is around what are the big rocks that you're seeing where there's compliance challenges around degradation of data or on untrustworthiness or whatever, that enables you to assist the financial institutions and connecting them with regulatory or Regtech solutions in an environment where it is a safe place to play. And it doesn't, you can label the environment whatever you like, it could be with test data, it could be with real data, but it's aligning the society of the financial services sector to improvement overall.
I mean, I think we'd be happy to talk about what opportunities there might be, and there might be some more obvious areas that we're interested in. I just caution against holding out that that's going to be the solution for Regtech entrepreneurs. I mean, we would obviously have a willingness to facilitate what we can, but actually the strength of this industry is the quality of the products and its ability to meet the demands of the customers, because we might think something's a good product or deals with problem X, but it may not be as good as something else that's developed, for example, overseas that deals with that problem. So, it needs to be regarded in its context. It may not mean that it gets taken up by industry. You probably realise that anyway, but... yeah.
I think part of that, to close out, might be an opportunity for ASIC to encourage the regulated base who might be understandably concerned that to run a pilot, Project X, requires me to adopt some cloud-based service that isn't quite mature enough to go all the way through my information security standards, I'm proposing to run it on n equals 100 of my carefully selected customers who've, you know what I mean? Like,
so those sorts of things, you know, we're very happy to talk about, and unlike other sectors of the community provide services into financial services, we actually have an innovation hub and a team who's directed to answer those sorts of questions and to do that. The reality of the work we do is every day we give exemptions to Australian businesses so they can do their business. That is part of the job we do every single day. For the technology sector, we've said not only can you come to us and ask us like anyone else can to think about an exemption that might be suitable, we've actually devoted a team to you. So you've been given a special status, so use it. But come with an idea that you've thought about, that's fully formed, and really it's a big favour for us if you can imagine what we might be worried about with that idea and have just worked out how you would address some of those things. But we've actually devoted a team of really senior people to help the technology industry in this area, so please feel able to use that.
Can I just add to that? I think from an industry perspective, we would love to get in the sandbox and play. We've often got the customers, we've got the data, and to be able to, play and experiment in an agile way would be great. I think exemptions are good, but they do slow up the process, and they can be an additional, even if it's a psychological barrier. Whereas if you actually had a situation where we were able to play in a sandbox in very defined parameters, I think you would start to see more little experiments and probably a mindset change, with smaller things which you could then scale over time. And I think the concern that sometimes the incumbents have is that they still have obligations which they need to meet under their licence. And there's a concern when you're innovating that if you're not meeting those obligations while you're innovating, even for a small customer set, it can be quite concerning, particularly for the risk team who might be asked to sign that off. So it's sort of navigating all of that it'd be good to continue that conversation. Yeah.
I was just going to add, I think also understand that regulators aren't just observers in this journey. In many cases, we're consumers of the services that Regtech firms are providing. So ASIC itself has trialled software that scrapes websites looking for misleading or deceptive conduct or conduct that is not meeting financial advice obligations. It's used software to aid the discovery process and litigation. I mean, there's a whole raft of Regtech software that we actually use, and we hope in doing that we actually provide a signal to the market more broadly that these are legitimate tools and they're worthy of consideration.
One super quick comment, Julian, and we've got to wrap up.
Just a quick addition to the previous comments about having a sandbox for the regulated participants, is that it needs to be across regulators.
Yep.
If you look at the, say, APRA's one on outsourcing,
yep,
that's obviously a hurdle that we can't get past on our own.
Yep.
So we need to actually bring all the regulators into the room to create that sandbox.
I think that's an excellent issue for follow-up. I imagine the potential to create some sort of expedited approval process for those exemptions that could either be done in advance or done in a very agile way could be a very helpful thing for the regulated base.
But I do think it needs to be really realistic. You know, to get 4 or 5 domestic regulators in a room, the idea is, and considering an exemption, the idea's got to be really developed, and then I think that there's a case for thinking about that. Yeah.
Terrific. Okay, we're a little over time. Thank you, audience, for your participation, and please join me in thanking the panel for